Thank you, sir, for having accepted our invitation. And it's going to be a learning experience for sure. And in fact, your contact was given to us by our own alumni, one of our finest student, that is Ms. Zoya Akhtar. And you also had the same equivalent respect for her, and you appreciated her as a student. And many of these students also, some of them at least, would be coming under you or any of the other faculty for internship in the coming months. We are very, very happy and glad to have you here, sir. So without wasting much time, probably I would ask you to probably start your presentation, and Dr. Anand was supposed to introduce you formally, which we will keep it to the end because we don't want to miss your lecture first.
Okay.
Take care.
First class. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, both the professors, and hi to all the students and to the faculty who may be listening in. First of all, I apologize for me being in a t-shirt for the simple reason I'm having a towel also with me because it's steaming hot here with no fan and nothing. So let me get on because of the power failure that I have. So as I said, thank you very much, Professor. I always wanted to come to Manipal physically, and hopefully if I get the chance, I will come over and come to your beautiful university and the place, of course. So I'm going to talk about the Indian Air Force in India's national security. All of us know the Air Force is the nation's Air Force. But what I will do is I'll talk about two things. What is air power? Generally, what is air power? And how does the IAF come into national security? That would be my aim. But before that, no, I can't see because I've got the full screen on, so I can't see any one of you. But I'm sure you recognize this guy. So if you recognize him, but I'm not asking about him, I'm asking about the aircraft at the back. I wonder how many of you can sort of answer to yourself, which is the aircraft at the back. All right, if that's not clear, then how about this guy? Certainly you'll recognize the Mobike, that's a bullet, and the Hero, but what's the aircraft? Those aircraft at the back. That's my question to you. I'm going to talk about what is air power and how does the Indian Air Force come into national security. Next. So I was asking about this question. I'm sure you recognize the person there. But my question is, what's the aircraft at the back? Next. And this one, I'm sure you recognize the motorcycle. But my question is, aircraft at the back. All right, we'll ask for questions at the end. Next, please. So what is air power? Next. It's the total ability of a nation to assert its will through the medium of air. Next. So you go from air to air and space, and that's how it forms to aerospace. So it's aerospace as such. And luckily the power is back. Hopefully it stays. Next, please. There's something called doctrine, air power doctrine. Next, please. And there is something, we see it like a tree. Any doctrine, it can be agricultural doctrine, it can be fisheries doctrine, it can be foreign policy doctrine. Let's talk about the air power doctrine. So in the air power doctrine, the roots of the tree represent history. And the roots take learnings from history and make the fundamental doctrine, make the environmental doctrine, which is depending on where you are operating, and then it comes to the Air Force doctrine. So the fundamental doctrine is the national defense doctrine, then it comes to the environment, and then it comes to the Air Force. And in the organizational doctrine, then you have the leaves of the tree. The leaves, as they wither with experience, what they face, the leaves go down into the ground, and the lessons are taken back up the tree. All right. So that's the that's the doctrine. Next, please. And that's how experience is fed back into this doctrine, and the doctrine is a live document, and it continues to and should be modified as we learn. Next, please. Now, this is from a famous novel. The army fights the enemy's army, the navy, the enemy's navy. Only the air force fights the enemy. Now, that's journalism. In present day circumstances, all the three arms of the services fight together so that the nation wins the war, not just the battle. Next. Now, you would have seen this in various forms. Now, this is the spectrum of how we live in. Starting off from the left, you have the domestic disaster relief, environmental operations, peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building. In the center, the gray portion where the two black lines overlap, that is where, is the insurgency, counterinsurgency type of things happening. And as you go further to the right on top comes to the nuclear war. So if you see at the bottom, you find air power, land power, sea power written. So air power is effective, very effective at the higher elements on the right side, moderately effective in the center. Similar thing goes for the sea power. But when it comes to land power, it is effective right from the left of the screen to short of nuclear war. Next. Now, what are the attributes of air power? You can just keep clicking till you come to the end of the slide, please. There is speed, which you all understand. There is reach, long distances, flexibility. Let me explain flexibility. A Mi-17 helicopter, you can load it with transport, with the load, with passengers, with casualties. Another day, you can strap up missiles, air-to-ground rockets. That's flexibility. Mobility. You can move elements of air power from one place to another very quickly. So you have a squadron operating from, say, Gwalior or, say, Thanjavur down south, and you say mobilize. And the squadron or elements of the squadron move quickly. And within, depending on how much distance they have to travel, within a period of 3 to 4 hours, they are ready to operate from another base. That is what is meant with mobility. Responsiveness. You would have heard this cold start thing happening, cold start about the army. That means you want to start with hardly any lag. As far as air power is concerned, it is freeze start. Today, now, you tell Western Air Command or Southern Air Command, launch a mission or launch missions against the adversary. You can do that depending on which is the command in a matter of 2 hours. We will go and strike. That is fast responsiveness. Concentration. You can bring power to concentrate at a point from different places. Unlike the army or the navy, where the elements go along, the army goes along and can act on a particular few kilometers or maybe 20-30 kilometers. But when it comes to aircraft can take off from Trivandrum. Another formation takes off from Mumbai. Another formation takes off from Bhuj or from up north in Pathankot, and they all meet at one point and strike Karachi. That means from different places they come and concentrate firepower at one place. That is called concentration of firepower, which only the air power can do. Shock effect. When bombs start landing one after the other, it creates a psychological effect on the adversary. Next. But there are limitations. You please keep clicking. There are limitations to air power. Just click back and come again. I can't see. Professor, can you hear me?
Now you can see, sir?
No, I'm just seeing limitations of air power. Just go back and come back again. Now I can see, go to, okay. Just hold it here. All right, so there are limitations of air power. There is base dependency. You require a base to operate from. And hence the enemy knows where the aircraft are going to come from. So that's a limitation. You require sustenance. fuel, food, oil, lubricants, petrol, houses to stay. So is sustainability, very sensitive to technology. And unfortunately, we are getting into technological asymmetry, and that is dangerous. So what happens in air power is, especially with the computing power going up, you are getting obsolescent and obsolete very quickly. So it's very sensitive to technology. It's vulnerable to attacks because of its, where they are, impermanency. An aircraft can be over a place for a certain amount of time and has to come back. But that impermanency, to an extent, is being reduced because of the UAVs which are coming on. And then there are political constraints. India and Pakistan have been at shelling each other, uh, and it's been carrying on for decades. But we don't use air power because there is a political constraints, and air power it changes it changes the ladder, the escalatory ladder. You go up the escalatory ladder when you use air power. So there are a lot of political constraints when you're using air power. Next. And of course, there is weather. Weather really affects. Now, the role of the IAF, it is like this. The Union War Book says to provide air defense to the Union of India. That means the Indian Air Force will make the policies and the plans for the complete Air Force. That is what is the statement in the Union War Book, which decides what are the duties and responsibilities of the various services. Next, please. So let's be clear. What is it, the area that you are interested in? We don't have a national security strategy. The best thing to go to is the MOD annual reports, which are there on the internet. You all please log in and you will get, the last one is of 1819. So if you notice, in the 2002-2003, it says from the Persian Gulf in the west to Malacca in the east, Central Asian republics in the north to Equator, a very limited area. It expanded in 2012-13, 10 years later. And it says regions of West, Central, Southeast Asia and Indian Ocean. Next, please. And now the latest one says Indo-Pacific 2018-19. So the expanse of what India is concerned with has increased tremendously. Let's wait for the latest report to come. Now, what are the sources of air power? I gave you a hint in the beginning of the slide. But first, let's talk. What does the Air Force reflect? It reflects national perspectives, priorities, and the strategic needs. That's what is expressed through the Air Force, through the equipping of the Air Force. And the Air Force has the necessary, all those things listed: structure, technology, organization, training, and infrastructure to do that. Next. All the air arms of the Army, Navy, Coast Guard form part of air power of a nation. Civil air resources, Air India, Indigo, SpiceJet, whatever, they are part of the nation's air power. The Union Home Secretary can, just by signing, requisition aircraft, say in Palam or wherever, okay, to launch troops, CAPF, whatever. They're all part of Indian air power. And there is space. And we'll talk a little bit about space as we go along. Next page. Now, what are the basic functions of air power? Control of the air. There are a few terms which I want you all to understand. Remember, this is not Indian Air Force, air power. This is air power of any country. You want to control air over your own ground surface, territorial boundaries, and to an extent over the enemy. That may not be the whole airspace, certain elements of it. You apply combat power. You enhance combat power by doing that concentration that I talked of, launching aircraft from various places. And you sustain combat power with your transport and helicopter assets, as also aerial refueling tankers, AWACS, the airborne early warning control aircraft. So these are the basic functions of air power. Next. So basically what it does is air power gives a forward posture. Because of the mobility I told you, you can position from Trivandrum to Jaisalmer, to Jodhpur, and start operating from there. And since you can go long distances, and since you can go fast, at speed, and concentrate, air power gives a forward posture to the power projection capability of a nation. When you're say talking of the army, if it goes on the offensive, moves what? 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers in a day. Air power projects power 24/7 depending on the aircraft it has, on the ranges of the aircraft. So these elements that are listed on the screen, deterrence, compellence, coercion, persuasion, dissuasion, all get acted on by air power. And I'll just explain a little bit of this. Next. Deterrence, we all understand. Don't do this or I'll do something to you. So that is deterrence, not to take a step that somebody is contemplating. Compellence is he has started to do something and you say stop or else and please retrace. So deterrence is passive. That person has not started acting and you have warned him. Compellence is affirmative action. Now, if we were sitting across each other in a classroom, I would have asked you, what is preferable, deterrence or compellence? Deterrence is preferable because of two reasons. One, you have not unleashed violence. And secondly, the adversary leadership can tell its own population, but I never wanted to do this. So what is the other chap talking? So you have achieved your aim of deterring him and you have permitted the adversary's leadership to keep face. So you maintain peace. That is how deterrence happens. Now in compellence, the adversary has started doing something and you say stop, retrace. The leadership tends to lose face amongst its followers, the population, and may continue. So you are compelled to continue your violent action also. So deterrence is preferable to compellence. Next, please. So this is what I said. So when you deter, you can assure. You can give an assurance. If you don't do this, I'll give you aid. I will do something. I will withdraw a little bit. And when you compel, you induce. You induce into him to say, please go back, then I will do something. So these are modifications. So one is reinforcement and the other one is modification. Next. Air power is an instrument of coercive diplomacy. Just remember this. For all its whatever books and theses written on air power, finally it comes down to one thing. Air power is an instrument of coercive diplomacy. You tell them that this is my power, this is my capability, and this is my intent. Make sure that you are credible, and then you can deter or compel. So air power is an instrument of coercive diplomacy. Next. It's all in the mind. Whom are you targeting or what are you targeting in coercion? It is the human mind, the mind of the leadership. So knowledge, tactics, creativity, planning, which are there in that written on that mug, and whether it is Sun Tzu or whether it is Fowler or it is Mahan or it is Kautilya or Thiruvallavur, it's all targeting the mind of the adversary. Next. So how is the Indian Air Force? Now I come to Indian Air Force. How is the Indian Air Force organized? We have 5 operational commands and a maintenance and training command. Next, please, and this I'll show you on the map so that you get an idea. So there are geographic commands. Western Air Command in Delhi, Eastern Air Command Shillong, Central Air Command Allahabad, Southwestern Air Command in Gandhinagar, and Southern Air Command in Thiruvananthapuram. These are geographical commands. Operational commands. They will go to war if the balloon goes up. And supporting them is the maintenance command at Nagpur and the training command, which is the feeder command to the operational command from Bangalore. Now this will change. You would have been reading about theaterization coming in with the Department of Military Affairs and the CDS. This will change. But presently, for the next few years, I feel In my view, maybe at least 2, 3, 4 years, at least 4 years, this should stay. Next thing. What is air strategy? Just keep it at this. No, okay. Air strategy, there are, if you see the top bullets of blocks of each, there is something called left-hand screen, left top is counter air. That means in an air strategy, you plan a counter air campaign, which is offensive. That means you go and strike him in his territory. Defensive counter air is you protect your own assets and your own airspace from the air. That is counter air campaign. If you come down, it says counter surface force campaign. That is very clear. Forces on the ground, infrastructure on the ground, that comes under, or on the seas, by the way, maritime air ops. That is counter surface force. Top right hand, combat enabling operations. Air AWACS, airborne early warning, flight refueling aircraft. Those are the air, the combat enabling operations in the air. And what about ground? Ground is protecting your own base assets from sabotage, from infiltrators, from making sure food is available and all that. These are all comes under the combat enable operations. And below that is strategic air campaign. The strategic air campaign, consists of nuclear operations, if it comes to that, and otherwise conventional operations where you do a lot of signaling. You do political signaling. Now, for example, remember in Sri Lanka, when the IPEAC, Indian Peacekeeping Force, went in. Before we went in, there was a sortie of Mirages that flew over Sri Lanka. That was political signaling. Then there is psychological operations, flying low, flying, dropping flares. These are all psychological operations which are strategic in nature. Next, please. So in any Air Force organization, please go back. Any Air Force organization, there are three prongs, whether it is air headquarters, a command headquarters, or any Air Force station. There is an operations arm, a maintenance arm, and an administrative. The operations arm has the squadrons, the air traffic control, who looks after the ATC, the weather department, the fire, crash services, all that comes under the operations. Maintenance, your vehicles, and maintenance of aircraft, radars, UAVs, all comes under maintenance. And there is the ADAM, looking after the housing, the food, the messing, the infrastructure, water. There is an administration, very, very important. You can't say ops is the most important and admin is the third. No. An army fights on its stomach. If the administration is not good, the operations will suffer. If the maintenance is not good, the operations will suffer. Three equal prongs under a commander of any station or air headquarters. Next. So, just a few photographs to show you how we started Indian Air Force in the independence. This is how Srinagar was saved. On 26th of October, the instrument of accession was signed, and on 27th, the Dakotas flew in the Sikhalai regiment to Srinagar. That's the Srinagar airfield. If you guys have been to Srinagar, now it's different, but that is what the airfield was at that point of time, and saved Srinagar and pushed the raiders back to beyond Pir Panjal and all those areas. Next, please. And a similar situation was in Leh. The raiders had come almost to Leh. Leh Valley and the valley beyond Khardungla was saved because of the airlift by Dakotas of the Indian Air Force. Next, please. There is Poonch airlift. You know Rajouri and Poonch. These are the places which are north of Jammu, right on the border. Now the Poonch Valley was saved by Dakotas landing there on the 8th of December. And they landed at night on a runway which was, if there was a runway, basically a beaten track, 600 feet. Can you imagine 600 feet? They landed by putting the army in there. And thereafter they maintained an air bridge for 1 full year and saved the Poonch Valley, the Poonch Bowl, and kept the connection back to the country. Next, please. The Northeast. The air operations are going on. Now, of course, reduced because a whole lot of roads have come up. But the far-flung areas of the Northeast were supplied by air. Besides the supplies that went in, there was a very important subtext to this, and that was the psychological connection to the mainland, that India is there, the Indian Air Force is there. This was in the Northeast. Next, please. And of course, we have taken part in sub-conventional operations. Op Pavan, which was Sri Lanka, Op Triveni, which is going on, the anti-Naxal operations which are going on in the Red Corridor, operations in the Northeast, which I've talked about, and Op Meghdut, the CHN glacier, started actually in 1978. That's where I landed the first time as a co-pilot. But Operation Meghdut started on 13th of April, 1984. So 36 years that operation is on at the highest battlefield of the world. Next. Just a few photographs before we get into further. We have so many strike assets. On the screen, you have got the Sukhoi on the left top and the Rafale, which has come in at the bottom on the right. Next. Besides, of course, you have got the Mirages, you have got the Jaguars, you have got the MiG-21s, the various versions, and of course the Tejas. Now these are the combat enablers. The AWACS mounted on IL-78 on the top left, airborne warning and control system, and IL-76 flight refuelers. Here you can see Sukhoi is being refueled in the air by the IL-78. Next. Transport support, very, very important. And you're reading it, seeing it on Twitter, on the social media, how the C-17 on top and the C-130s at the bottom, which are there, besides the IL-76, how much they are involved right now in COVID operations, transporting those oxygen tankers, those cylinders, those concentrators, so many things. Okay, the photo at the bottom is the C-130 landing at Daulat Begoldi, DBO, which is just next to the Karakoram Pass. This video is available on YouTube. Have a look. Wonderful video. Next. And then the rotary wing assets. I'll start from the bottom right. That's the Chinook, the heavy lift which has come. On the left bottom is the Apache, which is operating now in Leh and will go into operations if the Chinese decide to do something funny. So this is an anti-tank guided missile carrying aircraft and with rockets and front gun. Very, very potent. And on the top is my favorite, because I've flown this aircraft throughout my life, and that's the Cheetah. The Cheetah in the CHN glacier is what the photo is. Look at the helipad. This is what we call matchbox size helipad. No place, just that. You see a person in front, you can see one hand. He's saying, stop, don't come in front. And you see a person on the left, this marshaller on the left, he's saying, come down, you are safe. So the pilot who's there is looking at both the guy in front and the guy on the right, because he can't see anything below him. It's so small. So these are the type of operations which are going on in the CHN glacier. And Professor, I volunteer to carry out a lecture whenever you say, on CHN operations. It is something that people don't know about, and how air operations happen, with wonderful slides. I volunteer for that. Let me know when you want to have it. Next, please. This is another one from the CHN. Now look at the helicopter, the Cheetah. This is what we call pillaring effect. During winters, the snow is right up to the helipad, and in summers, it vanishes and the pillar is created. So while you are looking at the helicopter, look ahead a little. You see one orange spot? That is a marshaller. He has climbed up on that ladder. Can you see the ladder going up? That's an army soldier who's climbed up on the ladder, and from there he marshals the aircraft when it is coming in to land, because he has no place to stand on that helipad. Professor, can you see that marshaller?
Yes, sir.
So that's how CHN operations happen. Next, please. Yeah, that's it. Then there are joint operations. Warfare. No country will succeed if army fights the army, navy fights the navy. No. It has to be joint. the concentration of mass and capabilities of all three services have to be brought to bear where you want them to come together. So the sum of the whole sum is more than the individual sums. So IAF Army, Navy, Tri-Services, and with CRPF and Central Armed Police Forces in the Naxal area, and during peacetime when we airlift them for law and order duties as well as elections. Next. So a few slides on nation building, how the Indian Air Force is on to nation building. And I'll come to the operations part towards the end. So let me just finish this part, nation building. What you see here on top and bottom is a bulldozer being moved into a Mi-26 helicopter. Now these bulldozers are required by the border road organizations. They just cannot reach there because there are no roads. So the helicopters airlift them there, they make the roads and then come down. Next. In a similar manner, this is a Mi-26 from which a fuel bowser, a fuel tanker is coming out. This happened in the Uttarakhand flood relief. When it happened, there was no fuel for helicopters. So the bowser was taken and in a Mi-26. Next, please. Flood relief. See closely. This Mi-17 is hovering, wheels light on the rooftop. Wheels are just touching. It's not sitting down, because if it sits down, the house will collapse. So it's very light on wheels and the people are being brought in. You get so many of these photographs. Next, please. Similar, another one. This is also from Uttarakhand. And this is the Sarang helicopter, the versatility. One day they are doing demonstration flights, and I'll show you a photograph of that a little later. And the next day they are doing, because of their versatility and mobility, flood relief, earthquake relief, coming to the help of the countrymen. Next. And this is quite different. Project Tiger. The Air Force gets called to do these things also. Next, please. You see the Tiger? So relocation of the Tiger by the Indian Air Force. Now, that's air power for you. People, feel that air power is all, bullets and rifles and, the cross there and the bombs going and striking and the buildings exploding. Air Force is much more than that. Next. Military diplomacy. And that's the Sarang for you. Similarly, you have the Surya Kirans flying now the Hawk aircraft. So military diplomacy showcases the military capability of a nation to the countrymen and when they go outside to the world at large. That's the Sarang. I'm sure some of you, if not all, have seen the Sarang's display. It's just wonderful. Next. And then we go abroad on United Nations missions. That is part of the military diplomacy of a nation, part of the Indian Air Force Charter. And this is where I was in Sudan, and this is a helicopter from our contingent which was there when we were in Sudan in 2006, 2007. Next, please. We also had at that point of time the Mi-35, and that's a Mi-35 of the Indian Air Force painted white. It's supposed to spew violence, firepower, but it's gone there for deterrent effect on the rebels in Congo. So that's the deterrence factor on display for you right now, painted white, which is actually a symbol of peace. Next. So we have our human resource to look out for. We induct people, we develop people, and then we need to sustain them. And when you see, if you read, and the slides are with you all, when you read in between induction, promotions, separations, accessions, transitions, all those points are listed out there. Same thing goes for development, which starts with training, education, classification. As you come down, career planning, and sustenance is so important because after having spent so much of time and money, that person, that human is so very important, has to give back to the Air Force what the Air Force put in him or her. Next. Next. So why does the politician use air power? Flexibility I've spoken of, reach I've spoken of, versatility I've spoken of. So the politician, because remember, after all, the military forces are part of the politician's arsenal. That to a politician has started appearing as a magic potion, the panacea for everything. Send in air power. Next, please. And this is a slide. Next, please. Which reflects everybody wants air power. This came out when the Libyan problem started in 2011. If you see on the right, free Bahrain. This is that Arab springtime. Free Bahrain, free Syria, free Iran, free Ivory Coast, free Libya. Everything is demanded of that air power asset. But that is a misnomer. Air power has limitations that I talked about. Air power cannot do everything. Air power, just like other two powers, have to be part of a political plan. Okay, we are just one cog in the national security apparatus. Next. Okay, so this you would have got by now, which is it's just not manned combat. What you see on your TV screens, there's a small cross there and the bomb goes and strikes. There are ground components, transport, helicopters, airborne early warning and control, AVACs, UAS. UAS is unmanned aerial systems. And then this is a misnomer I want to create, to sort out. 1962, we all say Air Force was not used. Yes, the combat part was not used. The fighters were not used. A big mistake. But the transports and helicopters flew their pants off. The army was supported 24/7 and they really flew and there were casualties in the 1962 war. So next time when somebody says Air Force was not used in the 1962 Indochina war, please correct him or correct her and say yes, the combat part was not used, but the Air Force was used. Next. Aid to civil power. Can you use kinetic air power in disturbed area? This question comes up. Why can't we send attack helicopters to the Naxal areas and to put in inverted commas, sort them out? No, you just don't do that. They are our people. Air power, just like the Navy and the Army, are meant for an adversary. Those people there in the Red Corridor, for example, or in Kashmir, or in the Northeast, certain insurgency areas, are our people. The nation's armed forces cannot be used in these disturbed areas disproportionately or without legal sanctions. And then I've listed Indian elections. Let me assure you, because of the internal problems in certain parts, especially the Red Corridor, it is impossible to carry out elections without the Air Force, without the Air Force helicopters, to carry police personnel, election parties, ballot boxes, so many things. Okay, so that's aid to civil power in the internal sense. Next. Let's talk a bit now of our adversaries. Next, please. When we talk of China, you'll require another lecture or maybe 2-3 lectures to stop. But just to clear certain misconceptions, because Eastern Ladakh is active, which is actually, you can really see on the top. But all along our frontiers, this is the disposition of our airfields and the airfields that he has got. There have been 2 more, but that is just across the Nepalese border. Now, if you notice, all our airfields are close to each other and all of them are at very low altitudes. Whereas his airfields, starting off from the top, Kashgar, Hotan, Kargunsa, Hoping, they are all 12,000, 13,000, 15,000 feet. So what happens because of the reduced air density, the capability, the payload capability, how much of armament or fuel our aircraft can carry, comes down drastically. So he has this tremendous disadvantage. You can question me on that in the question and answer session, but this is the disposition with China or the People's Liberation Army Air Force, PLAF, versus the Indian Air Force. This is how we are ranged against each other. But just remember one thing. You don't have to be positioned at these helicopters to strike across. You can take off from Mumbai do an aerial refueling over Bhopal, and the enemy doesn't know he's coming, and do another airborne refueling over Kanpur, go and strike, come back and land at Dum Dum, Calcutta. Okay, so this is how air operations happen. Every unit has an operational role and an operation location where the unit moves and operates from there, which keeps changing. Similarly, it happens the other side. Next, please. All right, I must, before I end, speak a few words on Balakot, because that's the last thing we had with Pakistan. So first, let's put the two air forces together. The Pakistan Air Force is a professional air force. It is a professional air force. Don't believe those TV anchors which say that Indian Air Force will come and they will run away. No, it's not like that. They are a professional air force. And so are we. Maybe we are a shade better. And so is the People's Liberation Army Air Force. If an adversary starts thinking that you are not professional, then you are already won the battle, let me tell you. So we consider all our adversaries as professionals and we plan accordingly. He also has his plus points and minus points. The aim is to avoid his plus points and strike at the weak points, just as the way he does to us. So what happened in Balakot? Forget whether we killed some people. Forget whether we brought down an F-16 or they brought down a MiG-21. It is much more than that. Just remember, war is a contest of ideas. So it's a new idea which was not associated with India's image that was thrown up. We crossed the barrier, the Lakshman Rekha sort of all these years, which was maintained. But have we not done this before? The Indian political leadership is not foolish, irrespective of the party in power, whether who are in power now or who are in power 20 years back or in 65 or 71. The Indian political leadership is savvy. Okay, let me tell you this. When you may see a person in kurta pajama, but he's not a bumbling guy. Okay, he understands. He or she understands. So we crossed the IB in 65 war. Who gave the clearance? Lal Bahadur Shastri. We used all our statecraft and military tools in 71. Who gave the clearance? Indira Gandhi. Attack on mainland Pakistan, which happened this time, Balakot. Balakot is not in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. It was felt that we will only strike Pakistan occupied Kashmir and they will strike Indian part. But we went and struck Balakot, which is mainland Pakistan. That changed the rule of the game. The message that was conveyed was, please behave yourself, stop aiding terrorists, because for us now, we can strike anywhere. We sent that message. Okay, that is the importance of Balakot and the Indian Air Force strike on Balakot. Next, please. So, one click, one more. So, it was a strategic messaging. Next click. That we have come away from strategic restraint that we were doing all these whiles. Terrorists were striking us in Kashmir and elsewhere, and we were lumping it sort of, and we would just go and kill a few strangers. We said we hereafter do not have strategic restraint. That was the strategic message. One more, please. One more click. It was an example of offensive defense, which is to defend ourselves, we will go on the offensive. To defend ourselves, we will go on the offensive, because Balakot was an offensive strike. And incidentally, this is the strategic culture of China also. China says we are a very peace-loving nation. But if we feel a threat is developing, we will strike to defend ourselves. This is their strategic culture. Please Google the internet and read about China's strategic culture, Pakistan's strategic culture, so as to understand our adversaries. Next, please. So, are there any limitations of Indian air power? Of course there are. There are. The biggest one, the first bullet, we lack the bulwark of an indigenous industry to support its assets. Army, Navy, Air Force. Our assets are important, most of them, majority of them. If somebody wants to turn the screw, as it happened after Pokhran II, when the sanctions were applied, during that time, all the Navy Sea Kings were grounded because spare parts stopped coming. So our biggest problem is we do not have an indigenous industry. And that indigenous industry gives what is called strategic depth, which is that you can fight and your supplies will keep coming. That strategic depth is missing, and many limitations flow out from there. All right, the other thing, technological asymmetry is building up vis-a-vis China in almost all spheres in any case, but certainly in air power technology, and we have to guard against them. And you would have been reading in the press, our squadron numbers are down to 30. The government is seized of that. The Indian Air Force is seized of that. The only, shall I say, factory, aviation factory is the HAL, and the associated ones, the BEL, the BDL, they have to really pull up their socks and to perform by an order of magnitude much more than what they're doing today. Next. Next slide, please.
Can you see, sir?
Okay. So that's the summation side, correct? Yeah. So just to summarize all that I have said, air power gives forward posture. That is the whole crux of air power. And Indian Air Force gives that forward posture. Remember that Balakot strike? The Mirages took off from Gwalior, refueled somewhere in the hills from a flight refueling tanker and struck Balakot. The Sukhois took off from Adampur, Halwara, and Srinagar. The MiGs took off from Srinagar. There were diversionary strikes that took off from Punjab and Rajasthan to divert the attention towards the southern part. The Indian Air Force is ready 24/7. We have got new acquisitions, and India, with our transport and helicopter assets, I've written about it, can actually declare itself as a regional humanitarian aid provider. We can. Our C-17s, IL-76, C-130s, AN-32s. Tremendous capability. Helicopters, the Mi-17 fleet, almost 250 of them. Chinooks. Okay. A Chinook can fit into a C-17. So a C-17, suppose there is flood or something there and help is required by, say, Philippines or Thailand. A C-17 can transport a Chinook heavy lift into that place. So we can be a regional humanitarian provider. Space is strategic. I have not talked about space because that requires a different lecture. You can ask me any questions in the Q&A, but space is strategic now. It is part of air power. If a country neglects space, is asking for trouble. Unfortunately, China is really marching ahead of us in this. Our air power limitations basically is the defense industry, indigenous defense industry, which is pretty nominal. It has to be improved by many orders of magnitude. Next, please. And that's the Air Force logo. Touch the sky with glory. If you all have been to Leh, as the aircraft is on finals for the runway, look left. On top of the hill are these huge steel planks which we have put there. Touch the sky with glory. On the 8th of October, Air Force Day, Air Force Station Leh, all personnel climb up and paint this every year with tuna. That is white tuna out there. And this shot is from 1994 when I was commanding the helicopter unit, the cheetah that you see above the IAF, what the word IAF that is written by those. We got our personnel to write IAF there, and that's the cheetah at the back of the 114 helicopter unit, CHN Pioneers, which I had the pleasure and the privilege to command. That's the motto of the Air Force, and we live up and do everything so that this motto stays where it is. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, and I'll take your questions.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, those of you who have questions,
We have
can raise
questions.
your hand. In an order of this thing, I think Kiran will go first, and then we will take. Sir, you would want to take one question after the other question, or you
Yeah,
would want to take
no. We'll go question by question.
question by question?
Otherwise, we don't do justice to the question. Can we go off full screen so that I can see people? Can the people put on their videos? I don't know.
Yes, we will request them, sir. Can some of you put on your videos,
Yeah.
please?
And if you can
Just
go
to
off
keep it
full
more
screen, please.
interactive. Just to keep it more interactive. Students.
Dr. Anand, if you can please put off the full screen.
Anand, you can
okay, that's better.
close the presentation. Yeah. Kiran, you can start with your question.
Thanks, sir, for that in-depth knowledge about the Indian Air Force. I have a few queries, in fact, not just one question. My first query was regarding the heavy strategic airlift capability of India, because in the second wave we saw that C-17s played a huge role. The other aircraft we have is IL-76, but it's often the aircraft availability of that is always questioned. So what other options do we have? Because we know that C-17 production is stopped. That's the first one. Second one is regarding the replacement for the Cheetah and the other Aleut helicopter that we had, which is still going on for a long time. So where are we on that front? And the final question, final query I had was regarding our project with Ilyushin, wherein HL did start a project for coming up with a transport aircraft. But I guess in 2016, HL dropped out of it. So what are the options we have in regarding with strategic airlifting?
All right, good. Let me tell you, we have got 11 C-17s. So after the Americans, who have got some 200 something, we are the largest holders of C-17s in the world. Okay, even the Brits have got, I think, 5 or something like that. C-17, the capability is huge. It carries 70 tons. It has revolutionized airlift and air maintenance to Leh and Thois. Just to tell you, in summer months, because the air density comes down, there are times when the IL-76, older generation aircraft, old engines, would take off from Leh with no passengers, 0 passengers. When the temperature at Leh went up to something like 26, 27, it goes up there, okay. Whereas the C-17 comes back with 35 tons. Okay, so that's the difference in my order of magnitude as far as C-17 and IL-76 is concerned. C-17 production has stopped, yes. Do we require more C-17s? No. For our expanse and for our regional capability, our plans, our vision, we don't require more. We'll get the spare parts, hopefully, so that stays, okay. Now the IL-76, the question was, it's an old aircraft, but what was it on the IL-76?
It was regarding the aircraft availability, sir, because it said that it's less than 50% of availability, service availability.
Yeah. Okay. Generally, in the peacetime, which is not what we want, but availability is 50%. But when it comes to war or we're getting into the war zone, we work extra. Certain safety parameters are reduced, but within operational safety. Okay, and the serviceability is brought back to at least 70%. So if we have 10 aircraft, 7 will be on flight line. Just remember, beyond that, we have got the 12 C-130s and almost 95 AN-32s. So even if serviceability is 60%, you got 60 AN-32s available. So our airlift capability is good, rest assured. Chetak Cheetah replacement, to my understanding, it will be the light utility helicopter of the HAL, which should come up. You know, the negative list has just come out, the second negative list from the Ministry of Defense 3-4 days back. The negative list is that the items listed there will not be imported by law. It's a law. So one of the items is helicopters, single engine, land variant, maximum all of weight less than 3.5 tons will not be imported. So obviously it means the only one for a replacement is the LUH. Now this googly to this is that HAL has to perform. LUH, I mean, if you have to replace 200 Chetaks, HAL had better makes at least 20 Chetaks, 20 LUHs per year. It'll still take 10 years to replace them. All right. So that's the interplay that happens. Next question.
Sir, I have one more query if I can ask.
Go ahead. I am a retired guy. I have time and time. No problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this was regarding the recent DAP or the DPP of 2020. So we have included the aspect of leasing in that, especially with regarding the aerial refueling. For short term, it's fine, but what about the long term, sir? Should we think of more acquisition than leasing? What's your take on that?
See, that's a decision that when you sit in a chair where you have to sign and decide, I have this much of money, shall I set it for COVID relief or in food stuff and migrant relief, or give it to the Air Force to buy? So it is a decision maker's dilemma. It is very simple and easy to criticize. Now, the leasing argument or the leasing provision has been brought in. There are enough articles for leasing and anti-leasing, which if you Google, you will get. Leasing has a lot of issues. In the long run, you end up paying more. Obviously, that chap has to make some profit. Otherwise, why is he leasing it? But the advantage to you is you don't have to give millions of dollars today. You may have to give some 100,000 some dollars per year. But in the long run, you'll end up paying more. Plus, there'll be issues of when you return the aircraft after lease, what is its condition? And there's so many other intricacies involved. Okay. So yes, acquisition is better in the long run. But if you don't have money and you have people like countries like Pakistan and China sitting on your doorstep, the decision maker has to take a decision. Okay.
Next question by Srikotan.
Thank you, sir, for the lecture. I missed some of the parts because of the net connectivity issues. So since you said that you don't have time constraints, I have a big bunch of questions for you.
Go.
So, yes, sir. So I'll begin with the 1962 war. So the biggest question that we faced is why was the combat aircraft not used? I've heard that the American intelligence suggested against using it, but why was Indian strategic community so was it so immature to? Yeah.
Okay, got the question. Next.
Then, sir, it is regarding dropping out of the Sukhoi 57 production with Russia. Was that a strategic mistake? Then we went for the AMCA, and what is the status of that now? And are we going forward for a 6th generation aircraft? Because countries like Japan, they already invested $46 billion on Mitsubishi's 6th generation aircraft. Then another is regarding the Indian hypersonic missile system. Where are we on the development of that? Then this next question is something that I have asked a lot of people, but I haven't got a really good answer to that. So it is regarding this efficiency of Indian aircraft Rafale and Sukhoi 30 MK against J-20 of China, because I've read conflicting articles. Some supported the J-20, some said it was better than the American F-22s and say F-35s. So what is asked?
I'll give you an answer to this. Go ahead. Next question.
Yes, sir. And why are we behind Pakistan on attack helicopters? So yeah, these are some of the questions that I wanted to ask you.
Okay. From the questions, I can make out that I was a fool to show you those first two slides. What is the aircraft at the back type? I'm sure each one of you had an answer for that. All right. 1962 war. Why no fighters? When you read the accounts of those times, you realize that actually there was, besides that CIA report of the Americans saying don't use, the Chinese will come, there is also actually a letter from an Indian Air Force person in Air Headquarters who wrote to the ministry. It's a document which is available advising against that. All right, now this is history. You like it or not, it is there. So you read, Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal's my days with my years with the Air Force, Indian Air Force. There is that book by A.V.M. Arjun Subramaniam lately. So you will get this data. The politician goes on the advice that is given to it. Yes, it was a wrong advice. Air Chief Marshal Tipnis, my boss during the Kargil operations, he says they were ready, they were strapped up in the aircraft and they were ready to go to war, but the orders never came. And now when we think back with hindsight, the Chinese Air Force was absolutely rudimentary. They just couldn't have come and bombed. They just couldn't have. Whereas we were sitting at all those airfields, Hashimara, Tezpur, Dum Dum, Patna, Beta, our fighters were there and they would have actually sort of in a way stemmed the rot if nothing else. Because when an aircraft comes from the air, psychologically things change. So it was a mistake, very big mistake. Second, was it our mistake to get out of FGFA, the Russian FGFA Su-57? We already paid some $200 million, if I remember correctly. That's the figure that comes there for the design and development. And then we took a decision to come back because it was not meeting our requirements. That is what I know, that it was not meeting our requirements. And it was felt that the Russians were riding on our money. And it was not as stealthy as they were promising that it would be. Incidentally, now stealth is sort of going out of fashion. Incidentally, the Americans, they have now reordered the F-15EX. Okay, F-15 is not stealthy, but they've realized that the amount of maintenance that is required for making sure that the stealth properties are no scratch. When the aircraft flies, it hits small insects, dust, water, so many, comes back. It has to be maintained. If that stealthy properties have to be maintained. So it's not worth it. It's a trade-off. So that's the reason for the FGFA. But we are going for our AMCA, which you rightly say so. And where does the AMCA stand? Now the AMCA, as per Air Chief Marshal Bhadoria in one of the conferences said, they are not expecting it before 2040. 2040 in the operational squadron. The Aeronautical Development Agency, ADA, promises something else. I, having spent 40 years in the Air Force and in uniform, and having seen the work culture and things like that, I'll go with my chief, his assessment, than with the promise of ADA. Hypersonic missiles, we are lagging. DRDO is doing some work, but I know only as much as you know, as is in the open domain. Rafale and Sukhoi versus J-20. Just remember, aircraft don't fight against each other. It is a system that fights, one system versus the next other system. Yes, individual components of that system make up the potency of the system or the drawbacks of the system. The Rafale has potency and its own attributes. The J-20 has. But in the final analysis, how are we able to amalgamate them, those individual properties, into that strike package, into that air defense package, is what counts. It is not that one Rafale will come and one J-20 will come and they'll get into combat. No, it never happens like this. Those days are gone. Those 65 and 1971 days are gone. It is a system. Now, what happened on 27th of February 2019, the day after Balakot? The Pakistanis never came across. Their package came. We had our package. They never saw each other. Missiles were fired and the combat ended. They never saw each other. Okay, so that's how it is. So you cannot, yeah, you can say J-20 is stealthy, Rafale is not stealthy. So what? I'll go low. I have speed. I have my jammers. Okay, I have a strike package. I have a deception package. So I'll get through. So I'll achieve certain amount of stealthiness. I weigh it against a J-20. It cannot be done that. Okay. Why are we lagging behind in Pakistan in attack helicopters? No, we are not lagging behind. See, first of all, the Pakistani army has the attack helicopters. The helicopters are with the Pakistani army, not with the Air Force. They have got the Cobras. They are going in for the Turkish, but an embargo has been put on the engines, which are American. So America has put an embargo, so the Turks can't send them. So they've had to go back to the Chinese to get their Z, whatever that number is. So we are not behind as such. Not as such. We see our requirements and accordingly order that. Okay. All right.
Sir, then one more clarification. Like you said regarding the disadvantage for who, sir? Like regarding the high altitude airspaces that airstrips that China has and the low that we have. So disadvantage for whom? That was not clear to me.
With increase of altitude, the air density reduces. Aircraft lift capability depends on the air density. So when the air density, so I gave that example of our own example in summers in the IL-76, when it takes off from Leh, it comes back with 0 passengers sometimes. The temperature very high. Whereas the C-17 comes back with 30 tons. Because the engines are more powerful, they are more adaptable. Okay, the wingspan is different, etc., etc. So with increase in altitude, which is what the Chinese airfields are at. So when an aircraft takes off from a Chinese airfield, and the same time an aircraft takes off from say Hashimara or from say Tezpur, we are taking off from 300 feet above ground level, where the density is good. So we can take off with large payload and more fuel. Whereas that guy taking off from 15,000 or 14,000 feet has to come down on fuel and payload, armament delivery capability. So he gets restricted.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, may I ask my
Next
question?
question by Daksh.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, sir. So I have a few questions as well, but mine are more related to the air power aspect. So first of all, as you mentioned about the strategic signaling and how Balakot was important as a strategic signal. In your opinion, how frequent should the strategic signaling be in order to remain effective? For example, if we have conducted a Balakot strike, and you also spoke about deterrence as a passive aspect of it. How frequent should strategic signaling be to be effective to keep the enemy from being deterrent? Secondly, based upon the Balakot strike as well, what, in your opinion, or what in your information circle, has the changes been in the Pakistani organization to prevent a further Balakot, and how have we also, what changes have we also made to prevent any retaliatory signaling or retaliatory efforts from Pakistan? And of course, on offensive defense, I wanted to ask, in the Air Force doctrine, do we have provisions or do we have any views on preventive strikes or preemptive strikes? And finally, sir, we also had a lecture by Lieutenant General Kamath a couple of days ago, and he mentioned, in a lot of our lectures for that matter, there's been a mention of the lack of a national security strategy hampering our efficacy in terms of either acquirements or in terms of action, and a general roadmap for how to project our forces and capabilities. So, according to you, how much does the lack of a national security strategy affect or hamper the Air Force for that matter? And another thing which Lieutenant General Kamath said was that the inclusion of drones, especially the low-cost drones, would change the combat scenario quite dramatically. So, what is the status or what are the countermeasures we're using to at least deter drones or at least reduce their effectiveness in terms of combat? Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Strategic signaling, how frequent? This is a game. This is a game that both the sides play. Okay. So when we have these exercises, like Gagan Shakti, for example, we had, Pakistanis have their own exercises. But these are all displays to convey messages. When we have our air shows, these are all messages, these are all messaging, subtle messaging going on. Then when we have things like we enter into a contract with some country and say, we got this missile. Now, when we announce that the Rafale is coming with the Meteor, all right, now that's sending a message across that, all right, during Balakot, we were hampered because you had a better missile, beyond visual range missile, with a greater range. But now things are different. We've got it. Okay. So how frequently it should be done? Actually, it is being done every day. Literally it is being done. When you go and fly with some other air force, so the other guys, his tentacles are up, his people are listening on, and you convey a message. All these press conferences that happen. So strategic signaling, how frequent? It's actually happening every day. Okay. And you're sending out messages to say, don't mess with me. This is what we do. This is what we can do. And sometimes you actually open up. Like the Americans opened up to the Russians. They actually took the Russians during the Cold War days to their nuclear installations to show them that, boss, don't try stunts with us. This is what we have. This is our northern radar, that NORAD. This is how we monitor. So, you're already sending a message. So this is, it is like a punishment by denial. It's like a punishment by denial. The guy thinks, oh, why should I do? Because you already got that. So you're already deterring by denial in that sort of thing. Okay. Second, changes post Balakot. I am not privy, frankly, because these are all things both sides would have done. Both sides would have drawn lessons and accordingly taken steps. I'm quite sure. Okay. So since I'm not part of the system as such, but I'm sure we have drawn lessons because any professional force will draw lessons. And both sides are professional. Okay. Prevention and preemption. That comes from actually from a national policy. Though no air force operates on its own. All right. That flows from a national policy. And that actually leads me on to I am answering your next question also, the national security strategy. It flows from that. The two are linked. Can I preempt? I cannot preempt on my own. The air chief will be out of a job tomorrow if he does something like this. So preemption and prevention is a political decision. And that's part of the strategic culture or the messaging that is conveyed to the other side. Is the lack of an NSS hampering? Yes, it does. What does the national security strategy say? For example, I'll take the acquisitions, Wala Sain, because you asked me that question. Things are a little better organized now, but earlier, irrespective of the government, because remember the same dispensation was there in the beginning of this decade. We wanted to buy, but there is income tax, there is excise, there is customs, there is this, there is that. There were no directions given as part of the national security strategy, if it had been there, to say whenever customs duty on something is to be applied, MOD will be consulted. So those guys are on their own trip, somebody else is on their own trip. And then when you buy a thing from outside, you realize it's cheaper than the local guy who's importing stuff and his item becomes costly. So when you have a national security strategy, it is a strategy, it is not, because you all understand national security is not just services. It's not, national security is water, it's food, it's unemployment, is education, is everything. So in that national security strategy would convey a government's intent to say, listen, when it comes to armament, when it comes to this or that, when we are taking decisions along these avenues, these people have to get together, or these are my directions on acquisition of military hardware. So hopefully the NSS, if it comes out, when it comes out, the disadvantage why NSS is not coming out, because the moment it comes out, it's a document. You are bound by it. Now you have to live up to it. So the problem is the politician is having a ball, if I can use that word, because he has not said, I will do this. So you can't hold him accountable. Okay, low cost drones. Will it change? It's a very important thing, and suddenly the whole world is talking because of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Pick up India Today, which should be coming out maybe tomorrow or day after. I have an article on that precisely on. I think it's on the net also. It will come on the net. I have an article on this. They asked me to write on precisely this drones and where do we stand. It's an important part which has come in because it has opened up. It is not just drones. I'll take it one step further. It is unmanned systems. So manned teaming. It's part of the whole bigger thing of keeping man or woman away, a person away from harm's way. And since you can keep him or her away from harm's way, you can afford to take more latitude and go cheaper and lose those items which you cannot afford with a man on board. All right. So it has changed. Will it change dramatically? No, not dramatically. This threat was always there. Remember, in Armenia, Azerbaijan, the problem with Armenia was that its air defense systems could not catch the Azerbaijani UAVs. Now, if they had a better system, could they have caught it? Not exactly true, because the UAVs, the Bayraktar TV2s, were small. All right, but still they would be in a better position to do that. Okay, they would still get through, but they would have been in a better position. It would not have been as one-sided as it was.
Sorry, I was saying that do you see the potential of drones being used against drones? Especially now, there's a concept of swarms of smaller drones being used in conjunction with each other to sort of achieve operational objectives. So, do you see, like you said, an aircraft does not fight an aircraft, but do you see an effective counter to drones being more drones?
Oh yes, it'll come. The unmanned combat aerial aircraft, the UCAVs, which are there, is not just air to ground. Let me assure you, you will have unmanned aircraft maneuvering against each other with the type of artificial intelligence that has been incorporated now. That will come. We've already had refueling of a manned fighter from a unmanned aircraft. A refueling of an unmanned aircraft, unmanned UCAV, the UCAV from another UAV. So unmanned aerial refueling has already happened. Manned and unmanned refueling has also already happened. So unmanned combat will happen. It will happen.
Yes, Shishiraj.
Thank you, sir, for your lecture and time. I have many questions, but I will try to ask some of them. Like, sir, first of all, I want your thought on recently concluded Chinese strike near Eastern Ladakh. Chinese Air Force exercise near Eastern Ladakh, where they used J-11 and J-16, and they didn't use J-20. So I want your thought on. And the second question is about like our MMRCA. Like it's been going for 2 decades now, and still we are yet to buy a aircraft. So what are your thoughts on that? Like on decision making process, and like now that we have Rafale F4 flying, so what do you think that it would be a better contender against rest, since we are already operating F3? And like your thoughts on engine, like India has not successfully developed an aircraft engine. That is what hampering our development in this sector, mainly the engine problem. So how do you think we are going to counter that? Recently, we have entered in certain understandings with Rolls-Royce and other companies. And one more question, sir. Like it was displayed, like this combat air teaming system was displayed with Tejas Mark II. So that is our like future of man-machine teaming. So your thought on that? And last, or like what you think that Ghatak UCAV, which is currently under development, how do you think that will revolutionize our UCAV arsenal? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Chinese exercise off Ladakh that they did not use J-20, it doesn't concern us. I mean, it depends on what was the aim of that exercise. All right. Even if the J-20 had come, what is the J-20 for? It is for a fast dash into a particular area, contested area, using its stealth and speed, letting off long-range missile and coming back. That is what basically the J-20 is for. It is not for close combat. The size is huge, huge. Okay, it cannot get into that. So its aim is to deliver armament stealthily at long ranges. That's the whole aim of the J-20. So it depends on what that exercise is for. If it was for us, for against ground formations, then the J-11, J-16s are fine. J-20 not coming for the exercise, well, it's their choice. It was possibly not part of the scenario that they built up. Every air exercise has a scenario. You build a scenario. Tomorrow you may have a HADR exercise. Tomorrow you may have just an airborne airlifting exercise. Okay, so it depends on that. MMRCA, you're talking of, I suppose, the 114 fighter aircraft project. It's slow. It is required to build up our squadron strength. Where it's stuck, as it is, though, it was moving slow with COVID-19 and the government having no money, and this requires a huge amount of money. I really don't know where it stands. I would love to have an answer myself. I don't think the government has had any time, my understanding, to think about this 114 project in the last year. Maybe things will now gather pace. And as our economy comes back, if we have the money, then this 114 fighter aircraft thing or the MMRCA 2 that you're talking of will come. Why not more Rafales? Actually, it makes sense because we've got two stations. At least one squadron can come in each of the bases in any case. All right, but it is not such a simple thing. You cannot have a whole air force of just Sukhois. You cannot have just a whole air force of Rafales. It's what you're going to go against. It has to be a mix. Okay. So while some more Rafales would be welcome, we would like to have some more aircraft, maybe slightly lighter class. But then acquisition process in democracy is a very is not a simple process. So your guess is as good as mine. Aircraft engine, yes. We have spent decades and tons of money on GTRE and nothing has come out of it. Just remember, the Chinese have mastered the rocket engine. They have reached Mars, but they have not mastered top class aero engine to man their J-20. All right, but they are reaching there. They have taken the better part of 4 decades. Aero engine technology is very, very niche. All right, technology includes metallurgy. We're talking of metallurgy also. Okay, so there are actually, you can count the aero engine manufacturers on your fingertips. It's Rolls-Royce. It's in France. It is Snecma. In Russia, it is 2 of them. In America, it's actually 2, GE and Pratt and Whitney. That's it. So that's the niche that you're talking of. And when you're talking of aero engines, just remember one thing. Those guys are making money and surviving by exports, not for their internal use. If you think we develop an engine for just 100 Tejas plus maybe another few more, then we'll always be in a loss. Yes, for national security, we don't have to count money as such, and we would like to overrun that. That's fine, overlook that. But Engine technology is different. Do we need to make engines, or should we have good diplomatic, political contacts with the engine manufacturing country? Makes sense to do that. You'll be paying more, but in the overall run of things, it may be better. Ghatak and combat air team, the one that HAL showed, these are all drawing boards. They are on the drawing board. They were just projects that they are thinking of. It's not yet moved. So that's where we are. They showed it in the air show. And if you go back 2 years before, it was there too. All right. So these are all proposals that are there and still on the drawing board.
Thank you, Shishiraj. Aishwarya?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. So my question was related to ISR capabilities. So with the induction of Netra, so where do you think India stands in terms of ISR capabilities?
Okay, good question. Now, if you have an AEWC aircraft like the Netra going up, we expect that its coverage is good. Only thing, we have stopped at taking more than 3. There are also 2 with the Air Force, and 1 is for development by DRDO for the radar, which would go up in the AVAX India model. Remember, there are these projects that are happening. 2 more AVAX from abroad. Then there is AVAX India, which will have a radar mounted on an Airbus 330 airframe. And then there is this AEWNC. But we don't have an airframe to mount this radar. That's one part. Secondly, how effective is it? How capable is it? For ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, you have the ELINT and SIGINT systems, fine. But you can get that done also through UAVs. It's not just all alone. How effective they are, I'm afraid I don't have the answer. That will be a highly classified information. And even if I knew, I won't tell you, but I don't know. Okay. Next question, please.
Srikotan, do you have one more question?
Yes, sir. If you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Sir, it's just something I was wondering over. So, how does like USS B-2 Spirit bomber fare against Chinese defense systems currently? Do they still have an edge, or like is it being challenged?
Once again, the B-2, you see the size, the shape, and the requirement. What is its task? Is it to strike conventional targets, or is it to convey a nuclear carrier, nuclear bomb carrier? Is it worth putting a B-2 against an air defense which is potent? It is not Iraq. It is not Afghanistan. It is not it is contested airspace. So will it be able to sneak through the radars as part of a bigger formation, as part of a whole formation of support aircraft, which would be going in? America will have to take its call, because you can do the same thing by various other means. Okay, so while having that capability is good, because you can use that B-2 against flying from mainland US, air refueling, and strike Libya, strike somewhere else. Because when you're talking of an airstrike against China, you're talking of a war with China. Now, will the US and the Americans go to war with each other in the traditional sense? Or they would fight their wars in a third country, and this B-2 will go and bomb the third country. So politics, this is a melange which is very deceptive. And while they would be designing it with respect to beating the Chinese air defense, but it would be for a very limited type of missions.
I was thinking more on lines of like signaling towards China in case of like Taiwan. Like China is regularly getting into Taiwan airspace, and recently into Malaysia and even Philippines and even into Malaysia. So will they use that as kind of signaling?
Uh, See, China is smart. You see, the point is they are needling these countries and going into their territorial waters. And they are trying to see the reaction of the Americans and those own countries, the countries. Okay, so that as a signaling to say what will the Americans do? Send a B-2 into Chinese airspace or what? I don't think they will do that. The Chinese are not buzzing U.S. aircraft carriers, or coming into their envelope. They are not doing that. They are going to Taiwan, here, there, everywhere, to Japan, East China Sea. All right, where they know they'll make a lot of noise. This is like the global times during Eastern Ladakh crisis. This is all propaganda show saying we are here. So a lot of psyops going on in all these things. A lot of psyops.
Thanks. It was very interesting listening to you. Thank you.
Okay, sir, can you take one more question or?
Yeah. Go ahead. I
Kiran?
love interacting with kids. Please go ahead.
Sir, it's Kiran here again. Sorry for troubling you with so many questions.
No, just go ahead.
So you partially touched upon this while answering some of the questions. It's regarding the acquisition procedure basically. Like we invite bids, but a lot of players come in, but somewhere we end up giving it to the lowest bidder than paying more attention to the technology. So what's your take on it? Because in countries like United States, they kind of have competition and the best technology or the best player is given the uh, production order. But here in India, we follow like that the lowest bidder will be given. So what's your take on that? And is that affecting our capability somewhere?
Okay, basically it's that perennial contest between L1 T1. L1 lowest bidder, T1 best technology. So you would ideally like to go to somebody who is L1 and somebody who is T1 also. But the T1, since he's giving you a better technology, doesn't land up by being L1 and becomes L2, L3. So it becomes a choice. So the DAP sort of, the weightages are involved. Unfortunately, we've had so many of these scams that people are unwilling to give a reasoned argument on file, say this are the reasons where I say I will not go for L1, but I will go for this chap. And the system backs him up. Unfortunately, we are in that particular situation. So for that bureaucrat who finally signs, the bureaucrat can be the army, uniformed person or a civilian, saying, I will not go for L1, I will go for T1, even though he is L3. Because you can tomorrow put 20 questions. How do you weigh technology? How do you give weightage to technology? How do you give weightage to software? All right, this chap is zero point 0, I'm just saying, zero point 0.01 millisecond faster in acquisition than this chap. So he says, suppose it was 0.02. Why have you given him more marks? This chap is 0.02. So that weightages problem is coming up, and that it is hampering, you're right, on this L1, T1 business. All of us who have been in uniform and associated with this have said, don't stick to L1. But finally, when you land up in the decision-making chair, it's a big dilemma. I pity the chap who has to take this decision and say, not L1, but L2 because he is T1. Okay.
So a small follow-up if it's okay with you. You talked about the bureaucratic hurdle. So with the setting up of the CDS office, can we expect any betterment in that? Because people in uniform are getting into some of these matters.
Just remember the capital acquisition is still with Defense Secretary. Capital acquisition has not been transferred to the DMA. Okay, while so many other things have got transferred, but capital acquisition is still with the defense secretary. Will the DMA make a difference? Yes, in terms of prioritization, and maybe in terms of pushing the MOD part, the defense secretary part into taking faster decisions. But finally, it's the service headquarters, a little prioritization type of part by the DMA, and then it goes to defense secretary because acquisition, the DG acquisition is with the defense secretary and not with the DMA.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of this interaction. But before that, I'll just give an introduction to our Air Vice Marshal. Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur was commissioned in the Indian Air Force on 29th December 1976. He is a graduate of the Air Command and Staff College, USA, a postgraduate in Defense and Strategic Studies from Madras University, and an experimental test pilot from the French Test Pilot School. While on active service flying, he was a Cat A flying instructor and an Air Force examiner. AVM Bahadur commanded the frontline 114 helicopter unit at Leh and the two flying bases Jammu and Guwahati. He was the contingent commander of the first IAF United Nations mission in Sudan and was the head of training team at the Defense Services Staff College, Wellington. He was ACAS Operations TNH at Air Headquarters for 2.5 years and an Assistant Chief of Integrated Defense Staff at HQIDS, where he looked after tri-service capital acquisitions, and from where he retired from service. AVM Bahadur is a former Additional Director General, Center for Air Power Studies, New Delhi. The Air Marshal has lectured at the National Defense College and at war colleges in India and abroad. His columns on military and strategic affairs appear in leading newspapers and professional defense journals. And we are really, really grateful that you came and gave your lecture to our students here in Manipal. And we would certainly like you to come physically once all this crisis is over and further inspire this as well as the next batch of our MA students. I really am hopeful that that will happen very soon, and I am very sure that all of our students have got more than information, much more of a very holistic idea about what is the Indian Air Force all about, what are its capabilities. And I think a lot of them also cleared a lot of their doubts which they have been keeping in their mind and not finding answers for quite some time. So I'm glad that happened here, all because of your lecture. So thank you, Air Marshal, for being here, for coming and giving this lecture. So hopefully we will meet again. And of course, the special lectures which you said you want to really speak about, we will certainly try to schedule that shortly, sir.
Thank you, Professor. That's a feel good type of a lecture. Okay, when it's just informative lecture, that's about all. But somebody asked about UAVs, drones. So just look out for that India Today coming out tomorrow, day after. There is something on military doctrine that I have written. It's going to come out in Indian Express, an opinion piece next 2-3 days. So
we'll watch it.
Just look for that. And thank you, or thanks all of you. Wonderful questions, very intelligent questions. It's good to see so many people with this type of knowledge, and more importantly, these type of queries in areas of national security studies. Thank you, Professor, for calling me. It's been an experience.
It's always our pleasure. We look forward to more engagements with you. More of our students would want to know more on the operational part of it. And it's always a pleasure to listen to people like you. My special thanks to my colleague, Dr. Dhanushree. When I was looking for someone to deliver this lecture, she is the one who suggested. And then subsequently, as I mentioned in the beginning itself, it was Ms. Zoya who forwarded your contact to me, and immediately I texted you, and you also readily responded to that one, and you were much more cordial to accommodate our request today. So we are extremely grateful and indebted to you for having spared your time to be with us, and we look forward for many more interactions like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and all the best to all of you, the students special.
Thank you, sir.